The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and neither had the hunger. On that narrow street where the city dumped its forgotten souls, a fragile food stall stood like a tired old soldier refusing to surrender, its rusted metal frame shaking each time thunder rolled overhead. Inside it stood a woman with tired eyes and a spine bent not by age but by sacrifice, unaware that one small act of kindness performed years ago was about to return to her in a way so powerful it would silence an entire street and rewrite her destiny forever. If you believe that kindness never truly disappears, that even the smallest good deed can echo through time and return when it is needed most, then take a moment right now to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us what it means to be human. Her name was Kamala Divi, and the city knew her only as the woman with the corner stall. Every morning before the sun rose, she would wake in a single-room shack patched together with tin sheets and hope, wash her face with cold water, and tie her hair back with the same faded cloth ribbon she had owned for over 20 years. She cooked rice and lentils on a cracked stove, not because the food was special, but because it was all she could afford. By the time the city stirred awake, she was already standing behind her stall, serving meals to construction workers, rickshaw pullers, and anyone else who could spare a few coins. Her husband had died long ago from untreated illness, and her only son had been claimed by the streets when survival became more important than family. The stall was all she had, and even that barely kept hunger from her door. Those were the days when hunger felt like a second skin. Kamala knew it well, the hollow ache in the stomach that made breathing painful and dreams impossible. She had learned early that life was not fair, but she also believed something her mother had once whispered to her while dying on a hospital bed they could not afford. Never turn away someone who is hungry, because hunger has a memory longer than pain. Kamala carried those words with her like a prayer, even when they cost her more than she could give. One evening years ago, when the sky burned orange with sunset and the air smelled of dust and sweat, 3 boys appeared near her stall. They were barely teenagers, their clothes torn, faces streaked with grime, eyes sharp with fear and pride. They hovered nearby, pretending not to look at the food, pretending not to be hungry, but Kamala saw the way their hands trembled and their shoulders sagged. She knew that look because she had worn it once herself. Business had been slow that day, and she had counted her remaining portions carefully, knowing she needed to stretch them through the night. Still, something in her chest tightened as she watched the boys. She did not call out to them. She did not ask questions. She simply prepared 3 plates, filled them with rice and lentils, added a little extra salt and oil to make it filling, and placed them gently on the edge of the stall. She gestured softly, as if afraid to scare them away. The boys approached cautiously, disbelief flickering across their faces. They ate quickly, desperately, as if the food might vanish if they slowed down. Kamala turned away, pretending to clean the counter, giving them dignity and silence. When they finished, they nodded awkwardly and disappeared into the maze of alleys without a word. Kamala never learned their names, never expected to see them again, and never once regretted giving away the food she could barely spare. Life continued as it always did, heavy and unforgiving. Kamala aged quickly, her hands growing rougher, her back bending lower. The city changed around her, buildings rising where slums once stood, faces coming and going like waves. Her son never returned, and each year the stall earned less as bigger shops pushed her out. There were days she went to sleep hungry so her customers could eat, days she wondered if kindness was a luxury meant only for those who could afford it. Yet she kept going, because stopping meant surrender, and she had already lost too much to lose herself as well. Years passed, and the memory of those 3 boys faded into the long list of forgotten moments that made up her life. Then came the morning when everything changed. The sun was barely up, and Kamala was arranging her pots when the street suddenly fell silent. The familiar noise of engines, horns, and shouting seemed to freeze as three massive black G-Wagons turned onto the narrow road. Their polished bodies reflected the cracked pavement and peeling walls like mirrors from another world. People stopped walking, vendors froze mid-shout, children stared with wide eyes. No one understood what vehicles like those were doing in a place like this. The G-Wagons rolled to a halt directly in front of Kamala's stall, blocking the street completely. The engines purred softly, powerful and controlled, a sound that did not belong there. Kamala's heart pounded as fear crept into her chest. She wondered if she had done something wrong, if the city had finally decided she was no longer welcome. Her hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron, her mind racing through every unpaid fee and forgotten rule. The doors of the vehicles opened slowly, deliberately, as if time itself had slowed to witness the moment. Three men stepped out, their presence commanding attention without effort. They were tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in tailored suits that spoke of wealth earned and power claimed. Their faces were sharp, confident, but as their eyes fell upon Kamala, something softened. The street held its breath as the men approached the stall, their shoes untouched by the dust that coated everything else. Kamala felt small, invisible, and yet somehow at the center of something she could not understand. One of the men looked around, taking in the stall, the cracked pots, the faded sign. Another closed his eyes briefly, as if remembering something distant but vivid. The third stared directly at Kamala, his gaze steady and intense, and in that moment she felt a strange familiarity she could not place. Her heart whispered a warning and a hope at the same time. She waited, unable to speak, unsure whether to bow, run, or simply disappear. What happened next unfolded not with words, but with emotion so heavy it pressed against the air itself. The men stood before her, no arrogance, no condescension, only a quiet reverence. Years had transformed them, carved strength into their frames and confidence into their posture, but beneath it all were the same boys who had once hovered at the edge of her stall, starving and forgotten. The memory returned to Kamala in a sudden rush, like a long, lost dream crashing into reality. The trembling hands, the desperate eyes, the silent gratitude. Her breath caught as understanding bloomed, fragile and overwhelming. They had not forgotten her, not the food, not the kindness, not the dignity she had given them when the world offered nothing but cruelty. Those three boys had survived the streets, endured hunger, violence, and loss, and somewhere along the way they had found a path forward together. They had built something extraordinary from nothing, turning pain into ambition and desperation into drive. They had promised themselves that if they ever escaped the life they were born into, they would return to the woman who fed them without asking for anything in return. The street watched as the men moved closer, their expensive watches catching the sunlight, their faces reflecting emotion they had not allowed themselves to show in years. Kamala felt tears sting her eyes, confusion and disbelief twisting inside her chest. She had given food because it was the right thing to do, not because she expected a reward. Yet here it was, standing before her in the form of three lives transformed. The men arranged chairs for her, insisting she sit, their movements careful and respectful, as if she were someone precious. They spoke to the crowd, their voices calm but powerful, explaining who they were and why they had come. The street listened, stunned, as they told the story of hunger, survival, and one woman's kindness that had changed everything. Kamala barely heard the words. Her world had narrowed to the beating of her heart and the warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time in years, she did not feel invisible. They revealed that they now owned a successful logistics and construction empire, built from years of relentless work and loyalty to one another. They spoke of nights spent sleeping under bridges, of stealing scraps to survive, of dreams whispered in the dark. And they spoke of Kamala, of the day a tired woman with nothing gave them everything she could. That meal had not just filled their stomachs, it had reminded them that humanity still existed, that they were worth saving. The men presented her with documents she could barely understand, explaining that they had bought the land beneath her stall and the surrounding properties. They had built a small food center in her name, ensuring she would never struggle again. They had arranged for her medical care, a comfortable home, and a steady income for the rest of her life. But more than that, they offered her something money could not buy: acknowledgement, gratitude, and a place in their lives. They bowed their heads to her, right there on the dusty street, a gesture so powerful it brought tears to the eyes of everyone watching. Kamala wept openly, her tears falling onto the worn counter of the stall that had been her prison and her pride. She thought of her husband, her son, her mother's words, and all the nights she had questioned whether kindness was worth the cost. In that moment, she understood that nothing given with love is ever truly lost. The street erupted in quiet murmurs, then applause, then tears as neighbors realized they were witnessing something rare and beautiful. Hope, long absent from that corner of the city, returned like sunlight after a storm. As the day wore on, the G-Wagons remained parked, symbols of a journey that had come full circle. Kamala served food from her stall one last time, but this time her hands did not tremble with fear of scarcity. They moved with peace, with gratitude, with a sense of completion she had never known. The men stayed, eating with the same reverence they had shown years ago, surrounded by a community united by a story of kindness, rewarded. Before this story comes to an end, take a moment to comment below and share what this story made you feel. Tell us if you believe small acts of kindness can truly change lives, because your words might inspire someone else who is struggling to keep believing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with gold and purple, Kamala stood in front of her stall, no longer just a poor woman surviving day to day, but a symbol of compassion that had outlived hardship. The men prepared to leave, their lives calling them back to a world far removed from this street, yet forever tied to it by memory and gratitude. They promised to return, not as benefactors, but as sons honoring the woman who had fed them when the world had turned its back. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that goodness still exists even in the harshest places, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue spreading stories that matter. Kindness may seem small in the moment, but as you've seen, it can one day arrive in front of your life like 3 black G-Wagons, carrying gratitude, redemption, and the proof that love always finds its way back home.